Okay, let me just change this color to white so we can see easier. Okay, so we first of all, let's look at the fillet and chamfer. Pretty straightforward. I'm just gonna zoom in. Oh, if you want to do a fillet, say for example, what's this distance over here? 4. Okay, so make a smaller fillet. Fillet can be found here. You can see here there's the fillet, and then a chamfer can also be found here. So fillet and chamfer. If I click on fillet, AutoCAD is very helpful. It just tells you straight away to select the first object. So that means this object here. If I select that, then AutoCAD asks me to select the second object. So that's the second object. And nothing will happen. Why? If we look in our command bar, we can see that AutoCAD has created a radius, fillet for us with a radius of 0. So of course nothing's going to happen. Which means when we do a fillet before we choose the lines, we need to tell AutoCAD what the radius is going to be. So in this case here, you can see at the bottom, there's undo, polyline, radius, trim, multiple. We'll just talk about radius. So obviously that's the thing that changes the radius of the fillet. Here we can specify anything. I'm just going to specify a random number. And then I'm just going to click first object, second object, and the fillet is done for me automatically. For chamfer, very similar. Same thing, before we select where the chamfer is going to be, we need to inform AutoCAD what is the distance. You can see here, chamfer distance currently is 0 for distance 1 and 0 for distance 2. Over here you can see chamfer distance 0 and 0. So we need to set the distance. How do we do it? Just like our fillet, we're going to click on distance and they'll ask you to specify the first chamfer distance. I'm just going to give some number. Second chamfer distance, again, I'll give the same number. It's not like fillet where you do it once because it's only one arc. With chamfer, there's 2 sides, so you have to put the distance twice. Select the first line, select the second line, and now the chamfer is done for you automatically. Right? So that is fillets and chamfers. Array is pretty simple. Say I've got some circle here that I want to make a copy of, many copies at a set distance. I will use array, and there are 3 types actually, but we'll just focus on 2: rectangular array and polar array. Rectangular array means when we select the object and we press enter to tell AutoCAD this is the object we want to select, then you will see there's any number of circles or any number of copies of the original object that we want to make. Yeah, we can either drag, which is not very accurate, or we can make the changes up here. So you can see columns, maybe I only want 5 columns. Rows, maybe I want 5 rows. I want to change the distance between them. I can make all this, I can change them all here. So that one is in a rectangular array. How about a circular array or a polar array? A polar array works when you have a center. So you must have some center to start with. Could be the center of a circle, or it could be a point that you use. But basically the idea is that we take an object and we make copies of it in a circle. So let's see how that looks like. We select polar array. You can see here polar array has started. I'm going to click on the object I want to copy. Press enter to confirm the selection. Then now AutoCAD wants me to specify the center of the array, which is here. If you want the center point to appear, you need to move to the side of the circle first, and then you select that. Then you can choose however many items you want. I don't know, 80 or 800. I don't know, up to you. Oh, it's breaking down. So yeah, but the thing about arrays, there's one thing which you will notice, and not everyone will encounter this, but you may encounter. which is later when you are trimming, you are doing trims, excuse me, you may find that the array and whatever you're using to trim, it may not trim properly. And that's because how AutoCAD calculates the trim is they are calculating the intersection between two objects. So say this object here, this circle, and then this circle or line or whatever it is. Now the problem is that this array is treated as one object. When you select one, all the other circles are selected. So even though this is one circle, one by itself is one object by itself, but it's also part of larger array object. So AutoCAD tends to get confused. It cannot calculate the trim. If you encounter that, what you need to do is you need to split this array apart. So how do you do that? We're going to use the command explode. You're not going to find it very easily. You just have to type it out. You type explode, press enter to start the explode command. Then you select the object that you want to explode. So in this case here, this one. I select it, press enter, and now when I choose each individual circle, they're all by themselves, and the trim should be able to calculate. It should be able to run. So that's one thing. So fillet and chamfer found up here. Make sure that you select the fillet radius or the chamfer distance before you select the objects. Array is very simple. Just select the array you want, the object that you want to copy, and then make the changes based on the settings that you want. Now, dimensions. Let's talk about dimensions. Dimensions, there are two kinds of dimensions, or rather two kinds of annotations that we generally use. Text, you're already familiar with. You specify the area where you want, then you put in your text. So that one you're already familiar with. The other one is a general dimension. So a dimension, what it does is it tells you what the distance is between two objects. Could be a distance, it could be an angle, could be a radius, could be a diameter. So you've got all kinds of options here. Linear, radius, and diameter and angle, of course, are the most common. Sometimes you get an aligned one. Sometimes you want to do that. Sometimes you won't. So the difference between linear and aligned is linear will always calculate the horizontal or vertical distance. So for example, I've got some line here. Just going to draw some random bunch of lines. If I say linear, then what AutoCAD will do is it will calculate the horizontal distance, say like this, or maybe the vertical distance. So it will give that to me. But if I choose aligned, if I choose aligned, it will calculate the actual distance of the line. So there are sometimes there are situations where you want one over the other. So it's good to know lah which one to use. Now here in this case here, I've accidentally made a line that is just the right size for the dimension. But there are many times where, say for example, if we've got a larger line, or maybe say a smaller line, then a smaller line makes more sense. If we have a smaller line and then we attach a dimension to it, it will look too big. This is unbalanced. Let's say we've got our box here, whatever it is. I'm just going to draw that. So now our dimension is as big as the drawing, which is of course ridiculous. It makes your drawing unreadable, especially if you have multiple drawings, multiple dimensions for a view like this. Yeah. So just now you can move it up and down if you like. Okay, but that's for later. So we want to make changes to this. We want to change the size and also the thickness later. So let's change the size first. Now this one is quite complicated. So don't worry if you can't remember where to press, what to press. Just review the video and follow step by step. What we want to do is we want to make the changes to settings in the annotate tab. So under annotate, you can see there's a dimensions menu. And next to dimensions, there's a small little arrow is pointing diagonally downwards. So if you click on that arrow, now we enter the dimension style manager. And what we're going to do, we are going to modify. Obviously, you want to modify. We're not going to make a new one. We're not going to compare or override. What we want to do is we want to make changes. So we modify. Click on that. First thing you should do is try and make the video as large as possible. Sorry, the window. Make the window as large as possible. That's because this thing here is a preview. It's a preview of the changes that you make to your dimensions. So if you make changes to the dimensions and you want to know whether everything is balanced, this preview window will show you what it will look like. And what do we want to do? We want to change the text. Okay, so that's the text here. We want to make changes to it. Just now it was too big. We want to make it smaller. No problem. And then we've also got other elements, which is like, say, the arrows here, which are, they also have their own size. So maybe we want to make our arrows smaller as well. We've got these lines here, which are extension lines. Now, why are they called extension lines? The extension lines because they extend from the point you're trying to measure. So for this, for example, this here 1.0159 is the distance from this corner to this corner. So these 2 points are being measured, and an extension line extends from that point outwards or sideways or whatever. And then that's where your dimension will sit. And so this extension line here, you can control stuff about the extension line. You can also control the gap between the origin and the extension line. So the origin is this point, the point that you chose. And you can see there's a little gap here. For now, it looks fine. But when we start changing things like the text and the arrow, you will see that the gap becomes either too big or too small. So we need to change that too. Now let's fix that one by one. Let's say we want to change the text. We want to make it smaller. Obviously, if you want to change things about the text, you will go to the text tab. Right, very important that you take your time to read one by one. All the options are there. You just need to know how to look for it. And how to look for it is you have to read. So take your time, move your mouse cursor slowly one by one. What's the option you're looking for? What's the option you're looking for? Eventually, you'll find it. So here, text. Probably we want to change the text height. Just now that was a bit too big, right? Yeah, that was too big. So you can change the text height. Say, well, it's already very small. Let's say, just for example's sake, we say 0.1. It's now 0.18. Let's say it's 0.1. Okay, so now this is smaller. And then by default, I think you will see that your text is sitting on top of a dimension line. So now that the text is smaller, you might want it to go nearer to the dimension line, which is the offset. So let's make that smaller. You don't have to follow my numbers. You just roughly make some changes because what you see and what I draw may be slightly different. So now that the text has changed, we want to change the arrows. So let's change the arrow size. Something roughly the same size as our text. So just now that was 0.1. We can go back to 0.1. And then here we have the extension line sitting beyond the dimension line. Generally, we don't want it to stick so much. It really depends. Some prefer longer, some don't want it at all. So in this case here, with something to do with the lines, you can see it would be extend beyond dim lines over here. Maybe we can make that smaller. And you can see now it's shorter, looks a little neater, to me at least. And then finally, offset from origin, which is this gap here. Maybe we can make it smaller. That way, you have to be careful. You can't make it too near to the origin. You can't make it too far either. If it's too far, then we don't know where the dimension is pointing to. Yeah, it could be pointing elsewhere. This is easy to see because it's just a few lines. But when it's a complex component, if it's too far, you don't know where it's pointing at. If it's too near, then you don't know whether it's a drawing or whether it's a dimension. So there is a bit of judgment over there that you have to use. In this case here, I would say it's a little bit too near. That looks better. Easy to distinguish and yet easy to read. Okay, so you've made those changes. And now we can see still a little bit big. Maybe you can tweak later on. But that's how you make changes lah. So those are the main things that you change in your dimensions. Text size, offset from dim line, which is this gap here. Extend beyond dim lines, which is this extension. And then origin offset from origin, which is this gap over here. So that's what AutoCAD likes to call things. Any gap here, you usually call offset. And then, of course, these are the lines, these are the text. Oh, another thing is maybe you might encounter where your dimension is a comma. Okay, if you don't want that, then you will need to change your decimal separator under primary units. You'll have to change your decimal separator from comma to period in case your one defaults to a comma. Okay, or you might want to change the precision as well. The number of zeros really depends on what you're drawing. And there we go. Okay, so those are the dimensions. Now let's look at thickness. There's a thickness. Right now you can see that this dimension and this drawing, they are the same thickness. We don't want that. We want the dimension to be thinner, and we want the object line to be, well, at least the same thickness. So how do we do that? We go back and we choose under layers. Oh, sorry, here, layers over here. So let's look at the layer properties. We click at this button. Now we can see by default, we've got the 0 layer and the depth points layer. So let's make a couple more. We'll create a new layer. Let's call it construction if you need to. And let's have another one called dimensions. Actually, construction, maybe not yet, not for this exercise. So let's say we got dimensions here. Generally, we don't mess around with most of the settings. For color, for our exercises, we are not going to change color because we just want to print black and white. And what we will change is the line weight. So you can see here. Wait, there we go. So you can see a line weight is default. Default is 0.18. If I click on that, I can change the thickness. Line weight is basically thickness. So if 0.18 is the default, I'll just say 0 or 0.05. Something very, very thin, so that when you print out, you can see that one is thicker, one is thinner. So you can see here dimensions are 0.05. Let's put that aside. And now, how do we know what object is in what layer? So when you select something, it will tell you what layer is currently in. You can see here, layer is currently in layer 0. If I want to change it, I can just switch. I can just click on anywhere, let's see the arrow or the blank space, and I click on dimensions. Now, when I select the object, I can see that it belongs to the dimensions layer. Same for the other objects. If I select that, I can see that it's in the 0 layer. If you select a few, then you'll see it's blank. That means you know that you have several things in different layers. It won't show all at once. Now, how do we force something to be in a layer? We don't want to just select and then change, select and change all the time. That's very tedious. We don't want to do that. So what you can do is you can change your default layer.
Oh, I think that one. No, that one I put.
We can change our default layer. The default layer, if with nothing selected, nothing selected, we can just say I want to switch to dimensions. Now anything I draw will belong to the dimensions layer. I'm just going to change the color so it's easy to understand. Say for example, my dimensions layer is now default. When I select anything, when I draw something, it's going to be sent to the dimensions layer. If I choose 0 as the default layer, you can see it's like this. And just for an example, let's say I want to change that. I select the objects I want to change layer. I switch it to dimensions, and you can see all the settings are applied to it automatically. All right. So that is layers and thickness. Layers, thickness, and dimensions. I think that is the main thing that we will be doing for this exercise. So what we're going to do for our exercise, you're going to draw all 3 of those objects, the 3 objects that we covered just now. We'll draw those 3, draw your title block, and then I want you to add dimensions. So there will be one extra an extra layer of complexity. What you're gonna find is that dimensions is hard to dial in. That means the settings. If you start off, you're not familiar with what settings you like or what settings are good. You're going to find that some dimensions too big, some too small, or too close, or whatever. Generally, what I would say is you finish your drawings first and then start dimensioning. Okay, you don't dimension and then only change the dimension settings. Then all your dimensions will lari. Then you have to go and move them all over again. So make one dimension, change the settings like we did for dimension style manager. Change all the settings, make sure everything is okay, and then only continue to dimension. That way you'll be able to place the height, the position of it, all in the correct place. All right. So that is what we are going to do for exercise 2. Any questions?